Hello, my name is Matt Hilland. I'm a partner and financial advisor here at Arnold and Moat Wealth Management. And today we're going to be talking about IPERS, the pension system that's available for Iowans. The IPERS system is massive. About 10% of the people in the state have some sort of involvement with IPERS, either receiving a benefit or currently saving into the program. And we believe that IPERS is a great system and a tremendously valuable asset for many retirees, but it is rarely a benefit that's able to fully support you on its own through retirement. And so understanding how IPERS works with other retirement income like Social Security and other retirement savings like your 401ks or IRAs or Roth IRAs is really important. And so for this webinar, we're going to cover three main topics. First, we will very briefly discuss how your IPERS benefit is calculated. We try to keep these webinars relatively short, around 20 minutes, and there is already really good info out there that's put out by IPERS on how your IPERS benefit will be calculated. So we'll not spend a lot of time on that, but only on a few issues that are important for you to know as you get ready to start planning your retirement. For a more detailed look on how exactly your IPERS benefit is calculated and some of the fine print, do a Google search just for IPERS Member Handbook, which is a great resource that's put together each year by IPERS. Then we'll look at some different payout options that IPERS offers. Again, there's a lot of fine print that the handbook covers here, but we do want to give a few examples on your payout election and how that could change based on some different financial circumstances. If you've read through the IPERS handbook, the first few slides may not be new information to you, but it will get more exciting after we lay out just a few minutes of the groundwork. Because at the end, and maybe the most important part of this, and where we believe we can provide the most value for you today, is a discussion on some topics on how IPERS fits with your other retirement assets and how to effectively manage your retirement with IPERS. So let's get started. First, a brief overview on how your IPERS benefit is calculated. The amount you will receive in retirement is primarily based on three items: your salary, your multiplier, which is based on the number of years of service that you have, and then any reductions based on the time you begin your benefits. First, your salary. IPERS takes the average of your highest 3 or highest 5 years of your salary, depending on your employment class, and then multiplies that by what's called a multiplier, which is a percent number that's calculated based on your years of service. Every year you work into the IPERS system, your multiplier increases by 1 or 2% each year. So just for example, if your average salary was $60,000 and you have 30 years of service, your multiplier for this employee would be 60%, and 60% of your average salary is about $36,000. So as long as you don't qualify for any reductions, this will be your IPERS benefit, $36,000 per year or $3,000 per month, which is a very nice benefit. This is fairly easy to calculate and for most IPERS eligible retirees. And so if you're thinking about retiring soon, this is an easy first check for your retirement plan. You should understand the impact on your IPERS benefit by retiring now or retiring in a year or two. For some, it might make very little impact on when they retire. For others, like those who just received a significant raise less than a few years ago, or those under 30 years of service, the impact of just 1 or 2 years might be much greater. And then lastly, there may be reductions to your benefits. These reductions come from retiring before you're eligible to receive your full benefits. In order to not get a reduction, you must meet one of these three guidelines. First, the rule of 88. This simply means your age plus your years of service must add up to 88 or higher. So just for example, if you are age 60 with 28 years or more of service, you meet this rule and you will not receive any reductions in your benefits. Next is the rule of 62-20. This is if you are over the age of 62 and also have at least 20 years of service. If you meet this criteria, you can retire with your full IPERS benefit. And then lastly, at age 65, you become fully eligible. This reduction in benefits is 3% or 6% per year for each year that you retire early. And again, there are some very specific examples in the IPERS member handbook. So if you need to see some specific calculations to determine, exactly what your benefit would be if you were to retire early, look there. But again, these are some numbers that you want to check as you begin to plan for retirement. This is another example of how just a 1 or 2 year difference in your retirement date could have a big impact on the benefits for the rest of your life. So it's very important to understand. And then perhaps the most confusing part of your IPERS benefit, you will be asked to select from one of several different options for how you would like to receive your benefit and the possible survivor benefits as well. The first two shown here apply a lump sum to your spouse or family after you pass. For example, you could elect that you'll receive a slightly lower monthly benefit throughout your retirement, but when you die, your surviving spouse will receive $50,000, just for example. Options 3 and 4 here vary how much monthly benefit your spouse will receive if you were to pass away. If you elect a higher percent left to your spouse, your monthly benefit will be lower, but you'll have more comfort knowing that your spouse will have the income in case anything happens to you. Option 5 guarantees that no matter when you die, you and/or your family will receive a minimum of 10 years of IPERS payment. And lastly, the pop-up option is an election where if your spouse passes away first, your benefit will be increased then. This might be an election for those with spouses much younger than them they might be interested in. But we ran through these real quick. Again, your IPERS member handbook has a lot more detail and examples of these, but one thing we do want to cover in our webinar is how you go about beginning to choose these options. No option is right for everyone, and when we help clients analyze these choices, we use something that's called Monte Carlo analysis, which helps us simulate how assets like your investments and pension and Social Security will last over time and pay for your anticipated expenses. Remember, when you or a spouse pass away, you will lose some amount of Social Security income, so you need to factor that in. Then consider if your IPERS pension went away also. Would your surviving spouse still be able to make ends meet with the loss of those two sources of income? So that is exactly what we try to help clients answer. The answer is going to depend on the other sources of income you have, your other assets, and your goals and expenses that you want to make sure are paid for. The death benefit in option 1 or 2 can be valuable for those without a lot of savings who are solely dependent on their pension and Social Security for their expenses. The death benefit can provide a very useful influx of cash to pay for expenses that might occur when a spouse dies. And although there's certainly situations where it could be a fine choice, we don't see a lot of retirees, and we don't advise a lot of retirees to select option 3. In general, we find that most IPERS retirees want to leave some source of income to their spouse. Option 4 is what we tend to recommend and what we see a lot of people select. And the exact percent you want to leave behind will depend on your other assets and goals like we talked about. Okay, so you might be familiar with that information that we covered before now, but we want to make sure everyone here is on the same page with some basics about IPERS. Now let's get into how IPERS fits into your retirement plan. Because more than likely, IPERS is not enough by itself to fully support you and your spouse throughout retirement. IPERS is an important piece, a very important piece, but your other assets need to fill in the gaps where IPERS is lacking. And I thought it'd be valuable to go through a few of those here. The first big downside to IPERS, and any pension really, is the lack of inflation protection. If you receive $36,000 in IPERS benefits the first year you retire, that's going to be the same benefit you receive 20 years from now. And think back to 20 years ago to how much you paid for your house or how much you paid for your car or even smaller items like going out to lunch. Because of inflation, prices rise over time, and that means that the purchasing power of your IPERS benefit will slowly degrade over time. This chart here just shows the purchasing power of $36,000 over time with just 3% inflation. And even with that low inflation, notice by the end of your retirement here that $36,000 will buy less than half of what it did at the time you retired. This is incredibly important to realize because retirees have a lot of expenses still at the end of their lives, usually healthcare or new living arrangements, or even just more grandchildren to send Christmas gifts to. What that means is that your living expenses are very likely to increase through retirement, while your IPERS benefit will not keep up. That means you need to use your other assets harder later in life, or you need to lower your living standards as you age, and either way, that could pose a big problem. So when you're planning your retirement through IPERS, don't forget to look beyond those first few years you are retired. How well your expenses will be met 20 years from now depends on your other assets besides IPERS. And that is what we help retirees determine. We use that same Monte Carlo analysis we looked at before to help see the long-term sustainability of your plan. So what can you do to help offset the risks of inflation on your retirement that IPERS doesn't really help you cover? This is where some other retirement assets fit in, and where they might need to be managed a little bit differently than someone who doesn't have a pension. For most, this is investments that are in your other retirement accounts, like a 401k, IRA, or Roth IRA, and even a taxable brokerage account. First, you want to make sure that you have a diversified investment into stocks and not too heavily into bonds. Stocks have historically kept up with inflation better than bonds, and it's easy to understand why. Companies are usually pretty good at passing rising prices on to consumers. So if the cost of food goes up, Kraft is probably going to raise the prices on their box of macaroni and cheese. This will help Kraft keep its profits higher and help keep its stock price and dividend high as well, which is good for you as an investor anyway. A retiree who has a significant IPERS pension may also want to consider a higher allocation to stocks than those who do not have a pension. Your pension acts very similar to a bond in that it pays a fixed income every year. So if you invest significantly more of your retirement savings in bonds, you might be increasing your risk and exposure to the potential harms of inflation during your retirement. And for the bonds that you do keep in your investment accounts, consider inflation-protected options instead of traditional fixed income. TIPS are the most common investment that applies here. They are Treasury inflation-protected bonds whose value rises with inflation every year. These are guaranteed by the government, so you're not looking at risk of non-payment like a company bond, and you're guaranteed to at least make sure your investment keeps up with inflation over time. I-bonds are also another popular way to do the same thing. These are just like the old savings bonds that maybe you used to get, but they're linked to inflation and guaranteed not to lose value over time. You wouldn't buy these in your retirement accounts, but if you have large cash savings outside of your 401k or IRA, these could be a great place to park your cash in something that has a little bit of return, but that's also very safe and at least guaranteed to keep up with inflation. And lastly, it might be worth considering owning less long-term bonds than other investors. This gives you more flexibility in case inflation begins to rise, and it prevents you from being stuck in investments that might not keep up with inflation over time. The next thing to consider is your liquidity. IPERS is great for providing you a fixed source of income, but it's not good at helping you out with variable or one-time expenses. If you need a new car or a new roof in retirement, you can't go to IPERS and ask for your next 6 months of benefits. So for retirees on IPERS, having a little extra source of money that you can access is really important. This might mean having a little bit higher emergency or savings fund. It might be those I bonds that we talked about in the slide before, or it might mean keeping some money in a taxable brokerage account. Regardless, it's something to consider as you plan for retirement and the big expenses that you might have in retirement. You should think about where you're going to get extra money from for big one-time expenses that exceed your IPERS benefit. And the last item we want to go over today is to make sure you understand the impact your pension will have on your taxes during retirement. Because IPERS is a fixed payment every single month, you have no flexibility in how you take income like a retiree without a pension does. And sometimes this safety has a cost in terms of how you can control your taxes. One thing we find incredibly beneficial for a lot of retirees on a fixed income like IPERS is doing Roth conversions early on in retirement. Roth conversions become even more important for IPERS retirees because once the pension and Social Security payments kick in, they have almost no access to recognized income in the lower tax brackets. A lot of people think of our tax system or the tax brackets like buckets. Your first income you receive during the year begins to fill up the first bucket or the first tax bracket that's taxed at a low rate. Right now it's just 10%. And then as you earn more, you fill up that 10% bracket and you move into the 12% one. As that fills, your additional income's taxed at 12%, and eventually you move up into the 22% bracket for additional income. This goes on, but a retiree without a pension has much more room to make withdrawals from their IRA into these lower tax rates or these lower buckets. But a person with a pension likely has these lower buckets already filled from their pension income. That means any additional money they might need for variable expenses that comes from a retirement account like your 401k or IRA will probably be taxed at a higher rate. Roth conversions can help prevent that if you take action early enough into retirement. I should say we're not going to go into the full detailed Roth conversion discussion and walkthrough today, but if you look at our website and look on our blog, we have a few articles and a webinar that cover Roth conversions specifically. They are a little bit complicated, but we think they are incredibly valuable to some retirees. In general, though, Roth conversions have you recognize income early on in retirement and pay some more taxes up front, but in exchange, you have very little tax liability later in retirement. For a lot of retirees, and specifically those with sources of fixed income like IPERS, this is important to at least consider. And that is exactly what we do at Arnold & Moat Wealth Management. We talked about how your investments might be managed a little differently than those without IPERS, and that's exactly what we help retirees do. Investment management is an important part of what we do, but we do much more than just help retirees invest. Retirement planning and withdrawal strategies help you know with confidence where your money will come from and how long it will last. Tax planning helps you reduce the taxes you'll pay, like we talked about with Roth conversions on the last slide. Estate planning helps know that your loved ones are taken care of even after you're gone. This is a piece of your pension election that we talked about earlier in this webinar. And insurance review as well. A lot of retirees don't have significant need for life insurance, but we can look at, for example, long-term care insurance and make sure that your plan can last if you or a spouse would need long-term care anytime in your life. We focus on all of this and more to help our clients retire comfortably and with confidence to enjoy their retirement, even in times like today. And lastly, we think it's important for you to know who we are and why we believe you should listen to us, because not all financial advisors are the same. The primary thing that sets us apart from, maybe 90% of other financial advisors out there is that we are fee-only advisors and we are fiduciaries. Fee-only means that we don't accept commissions from anyone. So if we recommend a mutual fund or an insurance policy, we do not get any kickbacks from the fund companies or insurance companies. This helps ensure that we keep your best interests in mind. And this is not the case with a lot of other advisors out there whose paychecks depend on selling you an insurance policy or a specific investment, even if it's not the best investment for you. If you're looking for a financial advisor, we strongly recommend looking for a fee-only advisor. And lastly, as fiduciaries, we're required to act in your best interest. You need to be careful getting advice on IPERS from non-fiduciary advisors because they may suggest options that are not in your best interest, but are very good at lining their own pockets. This applies to things like lump sum payments from pensions, for example. This usually results in big paydays for advisors, but at the expense of your safety in retirement. So we would strongly recommend only speaking with a fiduciary financial advisor. That's all we have for today. Please reach out if we can help you begin to plan your retirement and determining how IPERS fits into that plan. We have our website up here where you can go and read more articles from us and watch other webinars we've done, or just send us an email and we'll be in touch. Thank you for listening and take care.